Good afternoon, welcome. This is the City Council work session for Tuesday, August 1st. First up on the agenda, we have public services.
Thank you, Your Honor. Item number 2 is the first item on our agenda that's starred. This is a resolution approving a project agreement between the City of Marion and Lynn County Secondary Roads Department. This has to do with the improvements on Fernal Road. This is right off of Highway 13. 29th Avenue is perpendicular to Fernal Road. So if you go north on 13, go east, Fernal Road is located there. We currently have a maintenance agreement established with Lynn County. Both of us share maintenance responsibilities. That section of roadway through there has deteriorated. It was seal coat at one time. County seal coated it about 15 years ago. This last year, most of the seal coat got ripped up, and so therefore County wanted to work with the City of Marion on getting a plan of improvements through there. As proposed, the City of Marion, here in blue, we'll go ahead and take care of that portion. We will do a 4-inch HMA overlay, hot mix asphalt overlay, and Lynn County will come here at this point and finish this out with a seal coat overlay, double seal coat overlay. We feel this is probably a fair agreement between both parties here, and we're recommending moving forward with it.
That's going to be this year?
Be this year, that's correct. Yep, we anticipated that. We budgeted for this. We're just trying to work out where the handoff point was with this project.
It's part of the budget.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yep. If you go on to 35th, is that us or?
Up north, 35th. I know there was discussion of improvements this year. I'm not sure if those are going to take place. I know there's work being done, but that's not us. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions on that?
Any other questions?
None?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Moving on, items 3 and 4. Item 3 is a public hearing regarding the Eco-Industrial Park grading project, and number 4, resolution approving the bids and awarding the contract to Rachi Construction. Back in May, Council approved a motion to solicit bids for the grading project. Completing this project will allow us to move forward with utility improvements in the park. We had about $325,000 budgeted for the project. In July, we let bids for the project. We had 6 firms respond to the bid. The low bid for the project was $140,943.50. That was Rachi Construction. They by far were the low bid. We were very surprised on the bid tabs when they came back, both the project engineer and myself, but we felt this was a good time to go out for bid. Fairly easy job to complete within the time frame. Late start date is August 28th. You have 60 working days to complete it. Late penalties are $500 per day. Fairly easy mobilization for that company right across the street. So we are recommending moving forward with the project. That's going to allow us to get the utilities in and move forward with the rest of the scope that we're looking at. So any questions with that?
It's just the darkened area?
Excuse me?
Darkened areas?
Yeah, the darkened area, we have roughly about, there's a significant amount of grade work to do. About 80,000 cubic yards of soil need to be moved. So it's a big project, but they should be able to get it done yet this year.
Okay. Questions?
Nope. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect timing. Good afternoon. Apologize for being late. I was at weapons qualifications. Marion Police Department is proposing an amendment to Marion City Code 5302. Basically what we're proposing is an amendment to the NORS ordinance that restricts us to enforcement on mufflers, loud vehicles, radios, things emitting from motor vehicles. Previously it was measured on a decibel level, and enforcement had to be enforced using a decibel meter, which really made it unenforceable. So we modeled a proposed ordinance after Dubuque, and it now restricts the audible to 200 feet from the vehicle. So we're proposing modifications to Marion Code 5302, Sections 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the remainder of the ordinance would remain in place as is.
Chief, would you explain how you're going, being a person who owns a few muscle cars, I can drive them pretty noisy. I can drive them pretty quiet. Same as the guy with the Harley Davidson. He can ride it pretty quiet, or he can really let it go. How are we going to, if I get stopped, say, for some other reason, speeding more likely than anything, are you going to make me rev up the motor or are you going to let me show you how I can drive it quiet?
Yeah, I think
That's the problem.
Common sense has to prevail here, and I think the enforcement of it has to be probably based on a complainant, to be frank. The modification to this came out of a complaint from some community members in regards to people revving motorcycles in their driveways, and it's just almost impossible to enforce. So I really think it's going to be common sense for the officers to, I don't think we're going to stop you and then turn on your vehicle and then go 200 feet away and see if we can hear it. That's not it. And if I got wind that was occurring, we'd probably come and revisit the ordinance or revisit the conduct of the officer, to be frank. So
We have one car that you kind of like, called
that would,
Smoking the Bandit,
whenever you're ready to get rid of it, I'm ready to go. I'm just
which
saying.
is about 500 horsepower. And if you don't let the valves breathe with an open exhaust on it and get on it, it's hard on the motor.
Sure.
So there's a reason sometimes to have a flow-through exhaust system or something. There isn't a reason to take the baffles out of a muffler on a Harley Davidson or a two-cycle motor, some of these crotch rocket things. So there's a fine line, and at times, if you get caught, if I'm caught for speeding, I'd like to be able to rev it up the normal 2,000 RPMs when they put their meter on there and see if that's legal, instead of making me put it up to 4,000 RPM. So that's
Sure.
So if someone,
And I think it'd be interesting for us to, if that type of situation comes along, we could always get the decibel meter out and see how it compared to the previous ordinance, to the new ordinance. And I bet there's not much of a difference in the sound levels. It's really just unenforceable unless the officer on the street goes and gets the decibel meter. It's calibrated, it's ready to go. So I don't know that it would be that much of a change in what we're going to see. And I don't know that we've been enforcing it at all because the decibel meter, just isn't where it needed to be at the PD. So
if someone can hear it within 200 feet, that's a violation.
correct.
I'm pleased that we have a meter and things. I got stopped in Wisconsin one time, and I asked the local policeman where his meter was, and he pointed at his ears. So I think it'll work all right. I'm getting calls because my friends have light cars with a 500 horsepower motor, and they have an open exhaust for a reason, and that is the valves in the motor.
Like I said, this was not something that we reacted to from multiple complaints we were getting from citizens in regards to loud vehicles, and that's really the only reason we pushed it, so we could do some enforcement
Right.
based
Some
on
of them are
complaints.
ridiculous, and the radio side. Okay.
In the past, if I had a complaint, I was told just to watch every day and see if they go by the house at the same time every day, and then contact the PD, and then maybe you would sit there on that day or something. Is that the same way it's going to be handled?
That's if we had a complaint, hey, we've got this every day, just like you said, if the officer has time and it's, we could prioritize how we get the officer out there to respond to that complaint. We could certainly do something like that.
Okay.
I don't see this as something my officer's taking and running with, and if I do, I'll probably issue some corrective instruction on what we need to be spending our time doing. If it's complaint-based, we'll probably do it. If it's not, I'll be honest with you, the guys are so busy right now with call volume, to be frank. We shouldn't be eating up our time on this type of stuff.
The calls I got were from the Harley people.
And they have good cause, in my opinion, because sometimes they make them noisy for safety. That way you can hear them better, and it raises awareness of where they're at.
I figure if they're not any noisier in our Harley when we get it, that they're legal.
And, if we can always revisit this, I mean, if we're getting feedback from the community that they don't like it, we can certainly bring it back to council and put it back the way it was.
Well, do you think the people who have complained, this will satisfy them, or they'll see this as an improvement?
The initial reaction to us going to the Dubuque ordinance was received positively from at least one person that I know. For the others, I don't know that I had any feedback.
Yeah.
Make it fizz a little bit.
Okay, other questions?
Thank
You're
you.
recommending we approve
Yes,
this?
sir.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Parks?
Hi, on the agenda today under Parks, I had number 3 starred. Basically, that is looking for submitting a Resource Enhancement and Protection Grant, or REAP, for development of the next phase of Lau Park project, which includes, as we've talked about before, the playground area, restroom, pavilion, and then landscaping associated with the next phase. The grant would be written to help support the cost associated with pavilion and restroom construction. We cannot apply for REAP funds associated with the playground project. So, but it does qualify for funds for the pavilion and restroom. So that's what we would gear the grant towards.
What's the planned timeline for building the playground?
Well, the overall plan for all phases, including the playground, is to work on development with our consultant, our architectural and engineering firm that we have brought on staff, are hired to help staff through the process. We will work on that development stage through the rest of the summer into fall, hopeful to have documents ready to go out for a letting early winter period is what we're hoping for. Have the construction phase start in the spring of 2018 is currently what we're looking at. The REAP grant application will go before Lynn County Conservation next week, actually, for review. They review it, and then if they give the okay, then it goes off to the state for their ranking. Through the process. We would know that award probably mid to late September of this year.
I have a question. It's a parks question, but what about the art sculptures that we saw a while back? When will those be installed out at Lau?
The bison sculpture
Yeah.
that is going on the west side of the park, installation is scheduled for that one August 10th. That's coming from the East Coast, so there's a little logistics there. The Prairie Revival that will go in as you enter the park off of 10th Street is scheduled also to have installed in August. We don't have an exact date yet. They're still finishing up some of the painting and a few miscellaneous items with that, but we hope to have both installed by the end of August. If I could, I don't know if the council has noticed that we've had a couple news releases go out the last couple days associated with the swimming pool.
Yeah.
We had incident at the pool yesterday. And we had that was being addressed. And then last night we had some vandalism at the pool where they threw some glass jars and glass over the fence, busted on the deck of the pool. And as a result of that, some of the glass ended up within the pool water. Protocols in place for that are that if we have suspect that there is glass in the water of the pool, those shards of glass can float and be distributed throughout the pool. So the protocol is that we drain the entire pool, do a wash down, and then refill the pool. So we have currently started that process of draining the pool. We have to be somewhat careful with how fast we do that. If we would drop that water too quickly, we could actually collapse the sidewalls of the pool. So it has to be pretty calculated as to how much water we release. Plus, we have to be careful with what our chlorine levels are before we do some of that discharge. Some of that is going into the regular sanitary sewer right now versus storm sewer. I talked to Ryan earlier today to inform him of our intent to do that. That helps us to speed up the process a little bit. Otherwise, we have to wait for those chlorine levels to go down before we can release that into the storm sewer system. So that's kind of the process where we're at to date, and I don't know if the council has any questions associated with that item.
We have security cameras out there, Mike?
We do not.
Do not.
That's something that's
think
worthwhile
that-
looking into, or?
The intent is, again, that's one of the areas that we have identified as we work through this overall citywide security camera item, that the pool would be one of those areas that we would do that install at.
Okay, other questions? Okay, for the next couple items, I'm turning the gavel over to the Deputy Mayor Pro Tem.
Engineering, item number 5.
Your Honor, items 5 and 6 actually are the same as we discussed last meeting. We have not progressed on the easement acquisition. However, we need to award the project and work through we have to do that within 30 days. So we have to do that, and then we'll work through the redesign if we have to, and do an extra work order through council at a future date. So the next item is the storm sewer annual program that we do. We did on July 25th receive 5 sealed bids. Low bid from Rachi Construction of $166,104. Thank you. At about 80.9% of the engineer's estimate. We are looking at drain tile and some storm sewer work in 6 locations around the city. Work will start no later than August 28th and be done within 35 working days. We do have liquidated damages of $300 per day, and we are recommending the award to Rachi Construction.
Questions on that?
Yeah, that's items 9 and 10. Item number 11 is the contract with Shoemaker and Holland for the Seamart Trail. Kesha in planning has been working with engineering over the last 6 to 8 months, getting this contract approved through the DOT to allow for the project to proceed. The project is funded within the current CIP fiscal year at about $1,351,000. The contract with Shoemaker and Holland is about 11% of that at $639,464.33. We have been awarded $4.6 million from the Corridor Metropolitan Organization, or the CMPO regional, for the trail project, which is from the city limits down here up through Menards and through the parks and up and through to the roundabout at 7th and 7th. So it's an extensive project. We did look at breaking it into phases, but the DOT did not want us to do that. So this contract will provide for all the engineering for the entire project. That includes acquisitions for right-of-way, includes the direction of that, the design, the permitting, everything associated with that trail, preparation for letting, and then assistance through the construction of the project.
When is that scheduled to be completed?
We don't have that schedule right now. Probably looking at a letting possibly next spring. We just don't have that date yet. And because of the size of the project, getting onto the DOT project schedule is difficult for the letting. A lot of hoops to jump through with this. Just right now, getting the design contract approved with Shoemaker and Holland. We worked with them in the past. With that, they will provide 3 concepts for a signature gateway bridge on 7th Avenue at the current overpass of the old railroad bridge.
That's
So
part of this.
That's part of this. They'll be working with Big. If you remember, they came in and did a presentation for a concept as well, and with that we will, I think, have 4 presentations, 4 concepts to be built in that location. Questions about that? Their fee is pretty, we feel it's pretty comparable, pretty market value. So, next item is a new item that we added. Having to do with the Tower Terrace Road project. Where Tower Terrace Road and Winslow Road come together, this is just north of the connection with Indian Creek Road. This is Winslow. This is the new alignment for Tower Terrace. There's currently, we're looking at building from here east. That's the next phase of Tower Terrace that we have council's approved, and we're looking forward to starting that work relatively soon. Currently, right now, there's a power line that runs from this pole at this location to this pole at this location and on up. There's Mediacom and I think it's Alliant, are both on that pole. Those 2 contracts, as you can see, for items 19 and 20, is about $116,000. They could not give us a firm number, as the work is kind of difficult to estimate. But they are estimating that it'll be in that amount for the 2 contracts. What we're planning on doing is actually having them come in after the street connection is made and boring underneath the street, which will keep them out of the way and is not going to cost any more than what we're currently looking at. So, but this is part of that project. We do not, staff's recommendation would be not to have those power lines going across Tower Terrace at any location. We've done that in several other previous phases, so we're just following through with what's been done in the past.
Okay.
Questions on that? So the last item under engineering is the same location. On Tower Terrace. Maybe shows a little better the alignment. This is between Indian Creek Road and Winslow Road. We are looking at building this section from Winslow Road, including this intersection. This will be closed down probably within the month to reconstruct this intersection, so that once we get that done, we can then close this intersection and start working from here over to Lennon, which isn't on here. But with that, we want to demolish this house, and these 2 smaller houses that the city currently owns. We did solicit bids, or quotes actually, for, I apologize, it came in at 3 o'clock today, so right up behind you. We forgot to at least when we published it. 3 o'clock today, we received 3 quotes. The lowest one is from Tauby Excavating for $29,600. As you can see, it's quite a bit lower than the other 2. We have done some research, feel comfortable with that recommendation for that quote. That includes the removal of all the buildings, all the trees inside the alignment. It includes the septic tank, the sewer the drainage field, everything connected with the area, the swimming pool that's there as well at this location. So that will be the clearing of this entire area within the alignment of the future Tower Terrace Road. So we recommend that you award that contract for that quote. We feel that's a really good price for what we're getting.
Yeah, why do you think there's such a big difference?
Smaller company, I suppose. The only thing I can figure out. They're from Marion. They're not in Marion, but they're from the Marion area. Jordan's
Grove Road.
Yeah, Jordan's Grove. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
We feel comfortable with them doing the work. We'll check them out more thoroughly by Thursday, and we'll let you know if that recommendation changes. However, we have already talked to them and feel that they've covered all the items that are within the contract. So.
Have they done other work for the city?
No, and we don't typically work with those types of, demolition contractors. So could be that they've been around a long time, do a lot of work, but they just haven't worked with us. So.
They've done a lot of work around the city. They may not have done any city work.
Yeah, I can't say anything wrong about them. I just don't know anything about them. So.
Okay. Questions?
That's it for me then. Thank you.
Fine.
Good afternoon. So on the agenda, we have a discussion item related to the hours of operation and Tower Terrace Road zoning. From the last meeting, obviously, there was a lot of conversation. I think we had almost 2 hours of public hearing, which I'm sure everybody enjoyed. What I wanted to do is talk about the motion that was passed in the tabling of the item. So Dave and I went back and listened to how that came out, and it was the motion to table is based on the staff going back and creating a district or doing something in the area to create Tower Terrace Road zoning as a whole. And I understand the desire for that. I think there's a lot of things that go into that, and I want to kind of walk you through what that entails, because I think there might be some confusion on that. And I think maybe I'll just start with that. So the cities, to go through and do an entire zoning of that area, we've got zoning from essentially Irish Drive east. Here's Irish Drive, and just so there's an Irish Drive is going to come down here and hit into this Irish Drive. So that ultimately will be the way that connection is made. So we have zoning this area. We got the O1 and we got PDC. Zoning to the west is A1 and O1. To come back and rezone all this into one district would be very difficult to do, because there's not going to be one single zoning district that would cover all of the aspects of what we're talking about here. What we use when we look at what zoning should go in is the city's comprehensive plan, which specifically identifies land use, general land use categories for an area. Our comprehensive plan, and mind you, it is just what it says it is. It's a general plan. This isn't a specific document that takes into account every property line, every natural feature, but it tries to just kind of provide a guide for the city council and staff and people in the real estate world as to what the area may actually develop in, or what the area should develop in it, because it's the city's plan in moving an area forward. So I just want to kind of illustrate to you what our comprehensive plan has identified in this area. Granted, this is small. It's hard to kind of do the entire community on a map, but this is 10th Street, Tower Terrace is here, and what you have is a neighborhood commercial land use district, and then a commercial node at the corner of Alburnett and Tower Terrace. So it generally identifies that commercial should be here and neighborhood and general content. So that's kind of where we are. I don't know if we go back to and have a conversation about what uses would go in this area, if we would have any other conversation except the conversation that we have before us right now, and that is bar, restaurant, and hours of operation. If we go back and start doing a new district, it's got to go to the Planning Commission for another public hearing. It's got to come to the council for another public hearing. And I would ask you if you really want to go through that process when I think all the comments that were made were relative to a bar, a restaurant, noise, and hours of operation. We've been through it a number of times. I don't know that anything new is going to come out of a public hearing regarding those topics of conversation. So at the meeting, I had made note that, if there's a desire to change the way the ordinance is being proposed from the Planning Commission, that is certainly a doable option. After reviewing it, talking with staff, and just having some general conversation about this, it would be staff's opinion and suggestion that we not take any action on Thursday, but to take a look at an ordinance, take a look at amending the ordinance to do three things. To
The proposed
remove
ordinance.
the existing, yes,
The proposed ordinance.
the proposed ordinance, remove bars, define bars and remove them. Because currently we define cocktail lounges, taverns, or we don't even have definitions for a couple of them, but they're interpreted. So we'll define what a bar is within the code, which would be an establishment that serves alcohol with over 50% of their sales liquor or alcohol. Define a restaurant consistent with the insurance requirements at the state level, which is they have to serve over 50% of the retail sales have to be food. So those are two, that could be a parameter, and that's how many communities define whether it's a restaurant or a bar. And then the third is on the hours of operation. I think the Tomaso's business owner came in and he spoke, and I think that to me was one of the most important points of the evening. If you own a business and you're limited by hours, it's going to be very difficult to operate, because what's going to happen on a night when there is a football game or whatever the issue is, you're going to have people coming into your business. So every day, if it's a busy deal on a Friday night, they're going to have to stand there to tell a customer, I'm sorry, we can't serve you. I'm sorry, we're not open. I'm sorry. So what business operator would be putting themselves in that kind of a position, even if they're not even going to be open normally till 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night? That was a difficult position to be in. So those are just some talking points that I think would be worth adding into the ordinance. I think if you think back to the public hearing, most of the comments were related to a bar scenario. Many of the scenarios that were discussed, I don't even think a lot of that happens in our uptown, and there's a 2 o'clock closing time. And I venture to guess, and not that I'm out every night on a weeknight, but I can tell you that if you go out on a Wednesday, Thursday in uptown Marion, there's many times when those bars are closing well before midnight. So that being said, I think there could also be an hours restriction, and if there is a desire to do that, I guess from a staff perspective, I think if you went to the 1 o'clock time frame, I think that would be adequate. From a staff perspective, I think the 1 o'clock time frame would be easier if it was implemented across the board, just 1 o'clock and not vary, but there could also be the desire by the council if you wanted to go Sunday through Thursday for midnight for restaurants. Those are just a couple of options, but I do think the first three, the define a bar, define a restaurant, eliminate bar, and then establish a 1 a.m. time frame for opening. I think that would go a long way in the ordinance. It does not require us to go back, republish a public notice or a public hearing. There would be 3 readings of the ordinance. I would, I guess, suggest that there be a discussion on Thursday's agenda, and that the first reading then happen at the second meeting in August for that. I don't want to get into a lot of things that were discussed that night unless the council wants to, but I would say that this should be simply for the area that was being recommended by the Planning Commission. So again, and I think there was some confusion at the meeting. I think the first person stood up and was speaking about a bar, and then it became, what is the reason for this application? And if you recall, staff brought it to the council, and the council directed staff to have it reviewed by the Planning Commission as a holistic idea. I know there's a couple people that are interested in seeing this move forward, but there's no application or proposal at this time. It's a general request to have the hours, or it's actually a recommendation by the Planning Commission to have the hours restriction lifted in this vicinity. And I've hatched the area on the area map here. I know you guys have seen all this, but there's the graphical representation of it on an aerial. I know there was a desire to see the plat. I think, Mary Lou, you had indicated you wanted to see this area. The houses continue here and go wrap around. I mean, there's lots out there. I don't know how many houses are built, but yeah. So that's kind of the situation out there, and what I guess from a staff perspective I would recommend. There was a lot of conversation and a lot of things said that I think a lot of people were, you may want to say they were just speaking off the cuff. For instance, this is Jefferson High School, Viking Lounge, Leonardo's, and I think there's another restaurant bar establishment here. This is all within 1,300 feet. So, just examples of land use patterns I think is also really good to look at. When you look at from a planning perspective what other areas and how they develop. This is University Avenue in Des Moines. You can see there's single family. There is a large buffer. I'll give them that. And this is all commercial.
There's a buffer there, and there's lots of trees.
Yep. Well, and you got to ask, and I don't know this, when the housing went in and when the commercial went in.
Yeah.
This of course, is Edgewood and Blair's Ferry, the Fountains project. This is that is not Hy-Vee. Here's Hy-Vee, here's single-family residential. You've got business establishments here directly adjacent to. East of Edgewood, you got Panera Bread. I think this is the movie theater, the conversation on the movie theater, single-family residential. I don't know if that one's... This was probably a more planned development because they've buffered it with multifamily, but this is a larger commercial development on the corner of what would equal Tower Terrace Road. This is probably a little busier roadway than we have around in Marion, but commercial, there is a buffer. But you can see it's adjacent to multifamily. This is the one that I kind of want to talk about a little bit more. So this is Robbins. This is Main Street. Iowa Eye Care. Well, this is the newest, and I would say this is I actually don't know, so I'm not going to interpret it, but it's I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. Lebowski's, which is a bar restaurant on their main thoroughfare across from residential, adjacent to their main street. I've got a couple more here, but I just want to. This is the one I really wanted to. So this is another local one. This is Hiawatha, Boyson, single-family residential. This is the development that Aumann's done between, I think, 18th and 17th Street. And you can see there's a buffer. Now, this is a fairly new development, and the buffer's starting to come in. I don't know if the buffer was established by the residents understanding there's commercial, or if the buffer was established as a part of the commercial development. I will say that, depending on what type of development comes in and platting, sometimes the buffer's established at the time, especially like at the beginning of this, when this property was platted and zoned, the residential went first. Some developers will put that buffer in at the time, Mr. Mooney did not. So it's an expectation of when the property develops that a buffer is provided. And there's 3 options for buffers. Some of them don't work in a lower area. If the drainage swale's in the back, you can't berm it. But so
if a proposed project were to come in for the property we're talking about right now, what would you require of the developer as far as buffering in connection with that project?
What is required in the code?
Which is what? Educate us. Sorry.
So there's 3 buffers. There's a landscape buffer, and I don't know the number of spacing per unit right off the top of my head, but I can find that out. There's a fence. They can do a fence with landscaping. And then there's a mounding or a berm that can be created with landscaping as well. Dave's in the audience, I think. It was pretty consistent, Dave. Dave does a lot of the site plan review, so he would know more specifically. So,
didn't Joe say something about a fence and
that was on
Mr. Mooney?
That was on the property.
The other section
and that would happen regardless
to the east
of whether we do anything with the zoning. There's a buffer requirement currently in place. With the development, they have to buffer.
But wasn't there one person who spoke who said they had been promised a berm and plantings and they still hadn't seen it? So
wasn't it?
I guess you got to understand, Mary Lou, that I don't know what he was promised and by who. I can assure you that he met the requirements of the code in order to put the buffer in.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem, though. If you trust some of these developers and they say, "Well, yes, we're going to do this," and then they don't, who suffers? The
they
person
don't
that
meet
bought
the code requirements. They don't get a certificate of occupancy. So he met the code requirements. There's no question about that.
Well, it just bothers me that an ordinance is a law. Okay.
Absolutely.
And just to nonchalantly discard one ordinance because you can't sell the lots and whatever and you can't develop them according to what you think you should be doing, I don't think that's good practice. Because a lot of these people are buying this stuff because they are looking at residential and they're looking at quiet residential. And just to change it to
it's currently, all of the uses that we're talking about can currently go in there now.
Yeah,
nothing is new.
I don't think there's anybody who reasonably expects that this land is going to sit there as a cornfield forever and it's not going to develop into commercial land. But we're talking about, is there a way to soften the impact on the homeowners who have a big investment in their home? So I like what you've proposed in terms of just eliminating bars altogether from that area. Maybe moving back the time limitation a little bit. That's also good. Is there a way to include just enhanced buffering, beyond what's currently required? To make sure that it's going to be sufficient to screen those backyards. Is there a way to include something like that?
At this point, the ordinance that's on the table, I guess, would cover.
And I know that the homeowners have some responsibility to do some of their own screening too. We have to acknowledge that. There's a responsibility on the homeowners to do their own buffering and screening. But, I'm trying to find
No, I understand.
common ground, middle ground that, makes everybody comfortable with this.
How comfortable would they be with, say, a Sunday through Thursday closing and then Friday, Saturday extended hours? That would satisfy, I would think, just about anybody, but you don't know what.
You're going to have to elaborate on what you just said.
Well, if you said something about Sunday through Thursday would be the restrictive closing time, but then having Friday and Saturday in case there were things going on at Linn-Mar and Mr. Peterson and Tomaso's, carrying on for a longer period of time. I don't know if that would be satisfactory to the folks that have bought the land out there.
Well, I think it's a question that the council, if you're going to ask them that, they're going to say no. I don't want to speak for them, but they're going to say no.
If it would be a compromise that they could accept, I wouldn't say no.
But I think it's the council that needs to think about the entire community and the development out there, and that's your guys' parameter. I'm just suggesting that what I would see would be at 1 o'clock, and then during the week, if there's a desire to do that, I'd maybe go to midnight, but I wouldn't back it off any further than that. Or you're just like the Tomaso guy says, why 5 nights out of the week I'm going to have to tell somebody they can't have a piece of pizza because he's not going to open. He's probably not going to stay open for if he can't serve. So.
Well, I would think that if people were going to be that crazy about having a piece of pizza, they would schedule an earlier purchase.
Well.
I would think, but what do I know?
In this limited area we're talking about, the buffering or the screening really only involves 3 lots.
Well, in all honesty, the ordinance that is being opened with this is this entire red area.
Oh, we're not talking about.
But the specific area that they're talking about, the hours, is here.
Now I'm confused. I thought we were only talking about that area.
Only talking about this area?
Yeah.
If you want to just make it that area, I don't know that you're buffering much because this isn't even a part of this area.
Right.
Right. You're not buffering.
Okay.
You know what I mean? You're not buffering anything.
Yeah.
If you wanted to,
Okay.
I guess if there's a desire for the buffering, this is what I would propose, is let me bring back to the next meeting the details of the buffer requirements per code, and let's amend the buffer requirements for everybody and not just one area. That would be what I would propose. That way when a development comes in, they just have to meet the new buffering standards wherever.
But eliminating the bars and the timer, and we're getting rid of the time requirement is only for that limited area?
Correct. The hatched area. That's correct.
Okay.
How do you propose, if you're not making a specific district out there, how do you propose to eliminate bars in just that one area? How do you do that?
You just say between 3rd Street and...
Yeah, we would legally
What other
describe
areas
it.
are zoned?
So we just...
The difficulty in this is a specific rezoning ordinance. You're not talking about the C3 district as a whole. So, we can craft this ordinance pretty particular. So, what we're talking about right now is this area, but I think we would come back and just say you can't have, no one's going to put a bar where you can't be open past 11 o'clock anyway, but we could eliminate bars for all that area.
Let's see.
Well, we're talking basically the whole thing. Currently, Linn-Mar should not have a football game going beyond 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah. If they were in this zoning district.
Yeah. How many other areas, Tom, if we were to change this one, change the time on it, and define, say, a difference between a restaurant and a bar, around town, how many other districts are there?
There is very limited areas where we have the C1. 29th Ave, 10th Street has the C1 district. I guess if we just do it here, they would be different than everywhere else because it would be very specific to this area. I guess let me just say that. That's what would happen in this instance. We're not changing when you open the C1 district or the C3. You are not changing that code. We're changing this ordinance, rezoning this property.
And you're going to have the same thing if you go out to the roundabout and then go to the highway.
Yeah.
You're going to have the same situation. Which came first, the housing or the commercial? Because that'll probably all be commercial on that corner of the roundabout out there.
Yes, that's a part of it. What outside of this, what I want to do is be able to come back to the council with, I showed you generally the comp plan. I get a little more specific and have that be an amendment to the comp plan so there's an understanding of what's going in out there. We tell people all the time that A1 is going to be commercial. When you look at our comp plan, it says it's going to be a commercial node. It's not very specific about what that is. But I can easily see, and I think it's important that I say this at the public meeting, that, I could see a small, mid-sized grocer there, outlots, convenience store. That's west of Irish, this vicinity, I see there being a heavier commercial presence on that corner, and our comp plan suggests that.
In essence, so you are, in fact, setting a separate zoning for Tower Terrace Road, whether you want to be or not, you are. Because anything else in that zoning around town will be back here for
we would
changing. Yeah.
Correct. So I guess that from a staff perspective, that's what we would recommend. I don't know how much, and I'm certainly not speaking for the neighborhoods, but as soon as we change it so much, we're back to the public hearing process. We go back to P&Z, we go back to City Council, and we rehash a lot of the comments that were made. And I would ask if if you feel compelled to do that, because there's going to be substantial changes to an ordinance, that's one thing. But from what we're talking about, if those seem to be addressing the citizens' concerns the most.
So I understand. So the rest of the red, except for this slashed out area, would still have the restricted hours, correct?
Correct.
Okay. It's just that one section. The rest of it would still be 11 o'clock.
Yep.
Okay.
And the rest of the red section, a bar could go in.
It could.
If they close at 11.
If they close at 11.
Right.
We can remove that.
But we're just talking about the slash section right now.
That's what we're talking about right now.
We're going to be having this conversation again, so why not just remove the bars altogether?
We could do that.
We're going to be having the same conversation again when we get to the
We
property
need
to
to
the east.
define what a bar is.
That's absolutely true. We will do that.
Is that going to be the definition of a bar? Is that going to be just for this area, or is that going to be citywide?
We will put it in this ordinance and amend the overall code. That's what we'll do. One of the problems we run into is the definitions that we were talking. We'll probably remove dancing establishments as a use too. I think the modern day term would be nightclub for that. Cocktail lounges also referenced a number of times, which probably the more modern term would be bar. Tavern is more of where they serve food in addition to alcohol.
So our city ordinance right now, it's over 50% food to be considered a restaurant, not a bar.
We use that definition in the liquor license.
Is that common?
To define a bar.
Is that common throughout the state?
That's the state law on liquor.
Is that a state law?
Yeah.
Okay.
For insurance purposes, your dram license.
And do other cities make that even more restrictive?
Not seen where they have. And Dave, did you see where they did that? I don't think that they did. I asked Dave to do a little research on it. We also looked into whether you could define a bar area. So let's say, a place comes in. That was the question when the application came in. Well, it's showing high top tables over in this area and then booths. And it was like, well, and we did not find a community that was doing it that way. I think that would be difficult to enforce and interpret. But that was one other option we looked at. So maybe, 30% of the floor plan could be bar area.
But from a
I think
liquor
that's
liability standpoint, the state does audit. It's a voluntary audit, and the restaurant will get an audit every year because the premium for a restaurant is about a third of what it is for a bar per $100 worth of sales. So there's a big difference, and if in fact they are still a restaurant, the state, we could follow that pretty closely.
Yep.
Whether they've fallen into being a bar or a restaurant.
Yeah. And I think that the communities we looked at, some asked for it yearly. You could do it, twice a year, or quarterly, or whatever. I don't know that we'd want to do that until there was an issue or a question, but that's be a part of that process.
Okay.
Are there any questions on it? I think that
Do you have what you need? Direction?
I believe so, yes. So we will, on Thursday, I'll just make a brief presentation on this, and I don't know if the council wants to provide direction to the community when what's being proposed, or if you want me to do that, or what. But and then we would plan on starting something at the next city council meeting. That would be the first reading of the tabled ordinance. Obviously, if people want to speak, it would be, at the mayor's discretion. We wouldn't be posting for a new public hearing.
Okay.
The next item, number 4 on Thursdays, there's a public hearing regarding the preliminary and final site development plan for Sunny Ridge Villas, located east of 13. The information was in your packet, and it's very similar to the one that was done on the east side of Bison Court, and they've continued that project to the west side. Do you guys have any specific questions on that? It was pretty straightforward, I think.
Any questions on that?
These are the units that are similar to the ones on Boyson Road by Drugtown and Cedar Rapids.
Okay.
Okay, we'll now move to item number 7.
For the next several items, I'm turning the gavel over
I'm
to
sorry.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem.
Deputy Dog, number 7.
Now I'm in trouble.
You are. Time's up on 7. What about here?
The area that we're talking about is located on 29th Avenue, west of 44th, east of 35th. It was a portion of what was about 80 acres undeveloped. We've been doing some development along the developer's been building some duplexes and triplexes west of Sherwood Drive. There'd be a connection here on 29th Avenue. So the area is the vacant ground. I think it's currently being farmed. It's like the last piece west of 44th, east of 35th. It's a good-sized tract of ground. There was a land use plan amendment to this. It wasn't a monumental one, but we always like to kind of bring it forward if there's any kind of question. It's really moving from a single-family to a multifamily districts. One along 35th and one along the west-southwest corner. They have buffered the south side of the development on the north side of 29th Avenue with some multifamily, and they've kind of curved it around adjacent to existing development. Pretty consistent. They've done a nice job of laying out the area. They're buffering their higher traffic roads such as 35th and 29th with multifamily development. So, that's typical development scenario. So there's 2 public hearings, one specifically on the land use map amendment, which I doubt if anybody speaks on, but we do require, or we are required to hold a public hearing on that. The zoning established here, the red highlighted area is the property we're talking about. The light green here would be rezoned to a planned development with single-family residential in the yellow. So it's similar to what was being proposed within the I think this is what everybody wants to see, so I'll show that. So this is the area that's being identified for multifamily. You can see they're buffering 35th. They'll have access onto 35th. This development won't be one final plat, so you won't see all of this come forward, but it will be a preliminary plat. There'll be larger, there'll be different phases of the development brought forward. 29th Avenue being buffered with duplexes and triplexes. And then the remaining property would be developed with single-family residential homes. You'll see they have a pond that's going to act as a detention basin as well, with houses surrounding it. Nice to see they're making an asset out of the detention area. So they've done that a little bit further to the west as well.
Is that sidewalk already widened there? In that
Yep.
on
Yeah, it was
29th?
done. If you recall,
Road's been widened there, okay.
yeah, Dustin Kern, when he developed the east, he had
Okay.
extended, we worked with him to extend 29th Avenue all the way to the west, so it wasn't chopped up into different phases. So the road cross sections there and the sidewalks are there. One of the concerns, and I believe the council did receive a letter from a group representing the adjacent property owners, and they're in this vicinity here. Well, they're over here. Their streets will be extended. They asked for covenants to be implemented for these areas. As the council knows, we really don't get into the covenant conversation. And that may be a question for the developer if you want to know more about that, if they're consistent or not. We did not get into that with him through our review process. We generally don't ask for the covenants unless there's a specific request. So that may be a question for the developer after the public hearing.
Just due west, that's all multifamily, right? Condos and stuff, west of the...
No, this is all single family.
No, just west of that, right there.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yep,
so
it's
that's
an
just
extension.
continue-
Yeah, sorry.
extension that into that area. So there is, for the current residents, there is a lot of single-family dwellings, a lot more coming in from where they're at before the multifamily.
Correct. They're buffering their single family with more. They're buffering new development with the same, and it's the same developer that did that, so it'll be a similar and like product. Even this road here, and I believe if you continue west, there's duplexes down on the south side of this road into Author's Edition, single family on the north, so it's single family backing to single family.
Okay.
I believe these lots are very similar in size. These lots are a little larger than other lots in the development, so there was a tendency to try and buffer, so you don't have a completely different lot sizes adjacent. The only area that I think is, what's that?
What you were just pointing at, is that part of this development, or is that already there?
Correct. This is part of the development. The road stub, here's a better picture of that.
They are putting larger lots on the end down there.
So you can see that these lots.
Gotcha. That's good.
The way that we did that development, we extended them all, so they'd have to go over one more, and then there's a street network we've been working off a concept for this area for many, many years. So nothing here was really a surprise from the perspective of development or street network standpoint. Down here it gets a little low. Down here it gets a little low. There's quite a large easement area here for the outlet, and so it'll be interesting to see how that rolls out when the actual calcs are done and preliminary plats brought forward. This would be the only area so that you have multifamily, and this is a large lot, single family, where there's like some conflict. So.
Any other questions?
The last item is a public hearing on Bowman Meadows. We're waiting for some graphics to represent the preliminary and final site development plans. So we were hoping to get those in. We did not receive them. And so at this point, since the public hearing's been advertised, we'd hold the public hearing, ask that the public hearing be continued to the next meeting, and then we would, when we would have the preliminary and final site development plan for the council to review. I wasn't comfortable bringing that forward without a graphical representation of those, even though it's a small development. The lots are 55 foot wide, which are much smaller than what we've seen in the past. there's not a real question in my mind that it's going to be a quality development. I just want to make sure that we have the appropriate illustrations to show the public, illustrate to the council the difference in what's going on there, and just be able to kind of paint the picture for what's being proposed.
So if we don't have those, we'll just go ahead and have the public hearing.
Well, we have to hold the public hearing because
Yeah,
it
right.
was, but we're not even going to put the resolutions on the agenda. We're just going to pull them off. So we'll hold the public hearing, and if anybody wants to speak on it, we would tell them that we would keep it open and have the items up for consideration at the next meeting.
Okay.
And it was single family there, correct?
Correct, yep. They're two-story homes, which we haven't seen a lot of those, and I think it's kind of refreshing to see something a little different. So, but we want to get some elevations, and since it is something a little bit different, it is required that they submit a preliminary and final site development plan. So it makes sense that we'd have more information. So,
Any other questions for Thomas? He looks tired to me.
Come on.
We'll move to administration, item number 1.
Give me a second here, and we'll hope that the technology cooperates. There we are. Well, I'm excited to finally be able to bring to the council really an overview of the proposed plans and concepts for uptown redevelopment. It's been a long time for us to get here. There have been a lot of moving parts between talking about the library project and then looking at the results of the RFP for the existing library site, talking about the two developers about the way that both projects could come and work together. And the reason I wanted to bring this to the council in this manner is that a lot of the narrative about this project keeps focusing on the library, talking about the library, and really the library is one component of this, but the overall project is really talking about a transformation of Uptown Marion, and I think it's important to look at it in that context. So if you go back to where we started, Marion started down the path to getting our Central Corridor plan created in 2009. We had started negotiating on buying the railroad right-of-way as far back as 2003, and once we acquired it, I think was in 2007, putting some money into it, doing cleanup, doing environmental assessments. But the Central Corridor plan was designed to tell us what should we do with that property. The two focuses that it had were looking at safety improvements, mainly traffic safety improvements up and down that corridor, and using that ground to leverage redevelopment opportunities. Some of the statistics that really stuck out in my mind in reviewing that plan were that of our Central Corridor, more than 60% of the parcels were valued at $100,000 or less. And this is your primary commercial corridor coming up and down through your community. I mean, this is the area where your highest value properties should be, not a preponderance of your lowest value properties. And additionally, I know the council probably gets tired of hearing me say it, but you've got this stretch that's a little over a mile long that accounts for half of our traffic accidents. And as traffic continues to go up with Marion's growth, I know you hear a lot about, well, do we need to do Alburnett Road? Why are we extending that road? Why are we doing this? If you look at the old maps of Marion and you look up 10th Street, you've got Central Avenue going one direction and Indian Creek Road going the other direction. You've got a perfect funnel taking all that growth to the north and funneling it right down into 10th Street in the middle of Marion's uptown. And that's not a good long-term recipe for safety for either the traveling public in cars or for pedestrians. Following up after the Central Corridor plan was adopted, you had Imaginate that started several months later, and that's where the idea that Marion's library was really due for an expansion came to light as one of the Grade 8 ideas. 2010, we got a little bit more granular with the uptown to take a look at what should we do specifically to the uptown on infrastructure improvements. That's where the whole pound sign concept came up, that around City Square Park and then a block radiating out from it in all directions, it needed to be done with enhanced streetscapes, widened sidewalks, more facilitation for pedestrians, and better lighting, and also to put brick streets back in. So the city's goals in coming out of those were to improve our transportation system. Walkability, especially in the uptown area, was important. For those of you that were able to go walk around our uptown and have participated in the Blue Zones projects where Dan Burden was here, you heard a lot about walkability and the challenges that Marion has related to that. Aesthetics are important. You know, I don't think anybody would disagree with me when I say that the streetscape in the uptown was looking pretty tired. 25 years old, even the trees were getting to the end of their life and starting to die off. A lot of the bricks that were put in the last time around were deteriorated. It's just weathered and due for an update. And then, of course, safety, improving the traffic flow for the increased traffic counts along 7th Avenue, better lighting, improving signage, getting rid of sign pollution, wayfinding, updating our transportation systems, then making provisions for other modes of transportation. As it was built, and for the most part is still currently conceived, especially on the 7th Avenue side, it is largely just built around the car. And if you look at the DOT statistics, since 2004, annual vehicle miles traveled have stayed flat or actually declined, and vehicle ownership is on the decline. So if we continue as a community to plan for everything based around the car as the only mode of transportation, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And then finally, especially on the 6th Avenue side, we needed to have a transportation route that had access control. A lot of our accidents along the existing central corridor are people getting rear-ended waiting for left-hand turns. It's just the nature of one of those 4 lanes. I've had several close calls myself where you'll be going down the inside lane and all of a sudden the car in front of you darts into the right-hand lane and all you can see is that car stopped in front of you waiting with its left-hand blinker on and you're still going 35 miles an hour. And that's the kind of stuff that we see. Our chain reaction accidents at several of the intersections. So along with improving the transportation system, we needed to take care of the brownfield conditions up and down the central corridor. We were able to get a lot of EPA funding to do that. We've gone through and we identified hot spots, we capped them. Most of them were due to things like old battery vaults and loading and unloading locomotives. We didn't have anything out there that would qualify as a Superfund site or anything like that, but we took care of those. And we identified areas that we've been able to implement land use controls to allow for redevelopment of those sites. So we bought the railroad right-of-way, and in those cases where we owned it, we did that direct remediation. We amended our TIF policy to assist businesses that are redeveloping sites that have brownfields. The new Lebeda building is a perfect example of that. That was one of the most challenging lots up in the entire central corridor, and we had to provide a lot of help to help them get that project moving. And by doing that, we've set ourselves up to be able to leverage outside funding resources. The hotel project down in the East End on the old Prince Ag site received $1 million of brownfield tax credits. So along with all that, we wanted to make sure that we maximized our opportunities for redevelopment. One of the things that has really changed in the commercial world is just the size of parcels that they expect. One of the things that I always find kind of interesting is that you listen to the folks talking out there along Tower Terrace about, well, they'll try to put a convenience store right behind me. No, they won't, because a convenience store wants a 250 foot by 250 foot square lot where they can have direct access from both directions. Tower Terrace Road is access controlled. They're not going to put in a convenience store if they can only have an entrance off Stonefield Lane. It just won't happen because it doesn't meet their requirements. So companies are looking for bigger pieces than they used to. They used to be fine with 120-foot deep lots, 60-foot wide, and now they're not. We knew we were going to have a lot of surplus property, not only from what we bought from the right-of-way, but also as we went through and started doing 6th Avenue. Council, obviously, we've bought a lot of parcels, and we don't need all of those sites, so we'll be disposing of some of that. In the uptown area proper, historic preservation was a big goal. We were able to meet the standards to become a Main Street district, and one of the pillars of Main Street is historic preservation used as a driver for economic development. And then finally, to increase our tax base. When I talk about 62% of the lots having a value of $100,000 or less, that's a tremendous opportunity as those properties turn over to build that tax base. My technology's not cooperating. Hang on. Hopefully I didn't drop my network connection.
I knew we should have
There we
paid
go.
that technology bill. Yeah.
So, to get more specific about the library, during this timeline, the city was really about 5 years ahead with doing the Central Quarter Plan in 2009. The library did their facilities needs assessment in May of 2014, and based on that, determined that just to meet current demand for housing collections, what we're circulating, and what you see peer communities offer, that we actually have a need for about 65,000 square feet. And even at that, with the way Marion has been growing and the way library demand has been growing, you still would be looking at a need for a future branch potentially within 10 years. The cost-benefit analysis then was received by the library board in July of 2014 and looked at 3 different alternatives. If we made a misstep, it was taking a 2008 drawing that was put together for free by a library consultant and putting it out there during some of our marketing, and people got fixated on the idea that we were going to expand the existing building. But we hadn't done any cost analysis of that, hadn't really looked at the impact of that. That's what that cost-benefit analysis really examined. And they looked at those 3 different alternatives: expanding the existing building, doing a new standalone building that was just a library, and then using a mixed use. And of the 3, the most cost-effective path forward was to look at doing a mixed use building. The fact of the matter is, with today's costs, the financial resources just were not going to be there to build a 65,000 square foot building. Even today, it's conceived as a 46,000 square foot facility. So the library board then followed up fairly quickly with that and did a request for qualifications for a master development partner to help work through the process of doing a mixed-use project. They ended up selecting Ryan Companies, and the initial focus was really on the lot in between here at City Hall and the library, taking a look at doing a building there. Then we were contacted by Noddle Companies, and Noddle Companies said, hey, look, we're looking at a couple of alternatives for our site, one of which is to sell it. And that's really when we said, hey, wait a minute, does it make sense to look at this lot instead? So we've been working on that really since about 2015 and looking at putting the costs together, coming up with a design. And then finally did a request for proposals for the existing library site in March of 2014, to which Aspect Architecture, Aspect Companies, and Knutson Construction responded. So there are several different pieces that come together really all at the same time. And the reason it's important to think about these things as a system is because there's a logical sequence that presents itself when you really look at it. So starting with the concept on the Marion Square Mall property. The library at that site would be coming in at around 46,000 square feet, 72 units of residential. The original concept was for 10,000 square feet of new retail facing onto 6th Avenue, with the parking for the residential units tucked underneath the building. The struggle we've had with that one really was the cost to provide that parking and the additional costs that are conferred by moving on to a site, and how do those get allocated out. The proposal on the existing library site, it has some similarities. 75 residential units, it's a story taller. One main difference between the two is that the commercial on the new library site, Marion Square Mall, is envisioned as being retail. This one, they're looking at retail being a very small piece of the footprint because they've been working to try to bring an employer in as part of this project. The company that they've been talking to would have about 150 employees. It would be a professional grade type of employer, professional services. And that's one thing that really, since ESCO has moved out of the uptown, we've really lacked. When I think about balance for the businesses, particularly the restaurants and services, having a major employer in the uptown is a good anchor for during the day to help balance out the residential at night. So then what happens to the block in between City Hall, the library, and the Marion Square Mall? The proposal that Aspect and Knutson put in was to actually build a parking structure on that site. And this is where we had to go back and have some further conversations, because their initial concept, they didn't know that we owned almost the entire block. They just knew that we owned the north half, so their concept was based on the north half. So we asked them to go back and take a look at what could you do if it took the entire block. And then also, what could you do if we were able to work with Ryan Companies across the street, eliminate the underground parking, and move that residential parking over into this structure? Because that's a significant cost savings. So as those conversations developed and as we talked about this, one of the items that I was concerned about is, if we were to make that area just a parking structure, were we giving up on any retail potential on that block or any potential taxable value on that block? And they came back and said, this parking ramp could be designed in such a way that we could put up to 16,000 square feet of retail on it facing 6th Avenue. Now, for it to work, you'd need a skywalk over to the library site, because then that gives the same type of parking amenity that they would have had with the underground parking, because people aren't exposed to the elements the way that they would have been if it was just an open parking lot. Also provides some opportunities to put the drop box for the library on the parking ramp side. And if you think about that block, we already have the mailbox in the middle of the block. We have a utility drop box over here at City Hall that occasionally causes problems because people are pulling into the out lane to use the utility drop box. They could conceivably be put on the main floor in the parking ramp and all put together in a row, so people would get used to using that. So what impact did that have on the overall project? Well, it increased the retail footprint, which means that there's more taxable value being created. The other thing that it does, though, is it gives us a potential landing zone for those businesses that are in the Marion Square Mall. Because if you think about sequentially how this would need to develop, logically you'd start the parking ramp first, because it's going to be needed to support the new library and the redevelopment of Marion Square Mall. So the parking structure starts first. You can do the retail on the main floor, get that all ready, build it out to the specifications that are needed for the businesses that want to relocate, move the businesses over, and then when that mall is empty, they can start with demolition right away. Make the connection to the new parking ramp when it's ready, because they can't start the redevelopment of the library site until the library moves. When we looked at it before, it was going to be between $300,000 and $600,000 to relocate the library temporarily if we were going to try to do a project on that site. So you build the new building at the Marion Square Mall site, the library moves, it's empty, and the developer then is free to move in and start doing their construction project on that piece. So at the end, we end up with more taxable value on the books. We end up with quite a bit more public parking, because the main level would always be maintained as public parking. As currently conceived, second level would be for residential and for the commercial that would be on the old library site. So financially, I wanted to break into that a little bit, and these are still fairly rough estimates because we don't have the new costs yet for putting retail underneath the library. But if you take out the costs of the parking and put some retail back in, that's about a $33 to $35 million project. About $4 to $5 million of it is retail and commercial, because one of the opportunities that gets created is that they can, with not having parking on the 6th Avenue side underneath the library, you can now put retail down there. So you put retail underneath the library, you put retail on the main floor on the parking ramp, and now all of a sudden you've got a retail corridor going down that block on 6th Avenue. It helps finish that out for that side of the street between the existing library site and City Hall. Creates more taxable value. The residential is about a $17 million piece, and then the library is between $13 and $14 million of that. On the existing library site, exclusive of the parking ramp, it's about a $24 million project. Again, about little more than $6 million is commercial retail because there's more square footage, and about the same cost for residential, similar number of units. I wanted to show you this because it just came in today and wasn't part of the presentation that was in the packet, but Ryan Companies wanted to at least provide a concept drawing of what their building could look like with retail facing 6th Avenue. So this would be if you were about what the view would be is if you were standing a couple hundred feet above City Hall, looking down on the corner of the building at 6th Avenue and 12th Streets. Then specifically to the parking structure, looking at what could be done there, as they proposed it initially, it would be they were looking at a two-phase parking structure. Phase one would have been 2 floors, no retail, and that was going to have about between a $6 and $7 million price tag, around $27,000 per space, 225 spaces. If we put the retail in initially, we do lose some parking spaces, and so that puts it at about 225 overall. It adds costs of about a $1.25 million to put that skywalk in to go across over to the library site, but you are then creating taxable value earlier at around $2 to $2.2 million for that 16,000 square feet. Phase 2 would be the 3rd floor. As proposed, this would be a parking ramp that would be built out of precast panels. So I've likened it before to building it out of Legos, but that kind of is what it is. You just bring in the 3rd floor and add the 3rd floor, and that potentially could add another 150 spaces, but it adds about $4 million to the cost. So how does it impact the tax base? If you look at all 3 of those blocks right now, there's exactly 2 taxable parcels. One is the Marion Square Mall. The other one is the duplex across the street. Between the 2 of them, they pay total property taxes of about $65,000 per year. So if all 3 of these projects are completed, you don't really raise your number of taxable parcels a whole lot because you've got 3, but the total taxes that you'd estimate to capture that would be available for increment are $650,000. And the reason I put a line down there on the projected exempt taxes is because when we do tax increment financing, there's a certain portion of the property tax levy we can never touch. It's debt service levies, the school's physical plant and equipment levy, and there's a few other ones in there that are exempt. So there's always a piece that has to go out to the taxing entities. That piece, if these projects are completed, goes to $104,000. So just the non-TIF piece, the piece that we can't touch, goes up by 50% over what is being paid on those parcels now. And then you've got the incremental value of that $650,000 a year on top of that. So then I started thinking about, well, what does this really mean for the Uptown, and how does it fit into the city's goals? Obviously, it's a way that we can build commerce. That potential employer has a lot of benefits for the Uptown by providing a source of daytime business. It does integrate the library better with the Uptown. I mean, that was one of the reasons why when we've talked about other locations, there was a lot of resistance to moving the library out of the Uptown. And I think, frankly, those same discussions happened with City Hall. City Hall, there was a less expensive option over in the old Ace Hardware building, but there was such a public sentiment that that center of city commerce needed to stay here that the city council chose to spend more and buy this site and build City Hall and keep it in the Uptown. And I think there's a lot of that similar sentiment with the library. But the way it's currently constructed, we don't really provide a reason for those 1,100 people a day that are going in and out of the doors to connect with the Uptown in another way. And this does, because it really puts them right in the middle of the Uptown, connects it to the park, and means that you're going to be going past retail in just virtually every direction to get into the library. It creates a lot of new spaces for additional development in the Uptown. You're taking existing retail out, yes, about 24,000 square feet of that, but you're replacing it with new retail, and a lot of that new retail is going to be better configured to fit their needs and to fit the needs of new commercial developers coming in. It addresses the constant perception that we don't have enough parking. You're more than doubling the amount of surface parking by having the main floor be public parking versus what we have over there now. If the council were to choose to bite the bullet and say, let's just put the 3rd floor on now, you're adding another 150 spaces into the equation beyond what we've got. I think our total uptown right now has in the neighborhood of around 325 to 350 spaces. At full build out, this ramp will have almost 400. So in one block, you're taking our entire supply and almost doubling it. But it's not cheap. And that's the thing that people have to realize, is that every time you complain about parking or people try to throw that out as a reason for why we shouldn't develop in the uptown, there are ways to address it, but they do cost money. As part of the project, we can look at completing the plaza upgrades adjacent to the library that was recommended to us to pursue back when we did our branding initiatives. It's a real opportunity to drive some investment back into City Square Park. We can finish up with any brownfield remediation that we have on those lots, and finally start to create some density. One of the reasons why we've got the roundabouts spaced where they are at 7th and 15th Streets is to create that expanded footprint for our uptown area to grow into. You know, our uptown, at the number of square blocks that are included, is an uptown of a city of 8,000 people. And in 15 years, Marion's going to be knocking at the door of 50,000, and the area between those two roundabouts is sized for a downtown for a city of 50,000 people. That was very intentional to create that footprint and to provide reasons for people to go vertical and create that density. If we go this way, we've finally got a real plan for how we can address the needs of the current tenants in the mall, because we can provide a landing zone. If the city is ultimately going to own the parking ramp, we're going to have a lot of control over what those spaces cost, and we can work with whoever's going to own the retail space to make sure the needs of those businesses are addressed. And we solve the issue about people crossing 6th Avenue, because that's another thing that people throw out as a spurious roadblock for why we shouldn't do the library, because now kids are going to cross 6th Avenue. Well, now you've got a skywalk, so they have an alternative. If people aren't comfortable with them crossing at grade level, they're going to have an alternative that separates them from the other traffic. But we are at a point where the council needs to make some decisions, and the reason I wanted to bring this to the council is because I didn't feel like these are not really things that you can throw to the library board. The library board is responsible for the library, but the library is, at this point, maybe 20% of the overall project as it would be conceived, and there are a lot of pieces related to this that just don't really fall underneath their bailiwick. They want a nice library, they want to continue to provide great services inside the library, but that's kind of where their concern ends. How it gets financed, any TIF agreements, how it gets put together really needs to come over to the city council. As part of this overall project, we really need to make a decision on 11th Street. The only adopted plan that we've got right now says 11th Street is supposed to go through. Every concept drawing we've looked at for the Marion Square Mall shows that area being closed to traffic. If that area block is closed to traffic, we've got the option then to close the block between 5th and 6th Avenues to traffic as well. The concept that Knutson and Aspect originally put in showed a skywalk coming through there. If we close that section of street, that's $1.25 million that doesn't need to be spent on the project, because you don't have to put in that second skywalk. The ownership of the parking is something that could be done a couple of different ways. Ultimately, in most cases where you've got a parking ramp that has public parking in it, it's owned publicly, either by a city or it's owned by a nonprofit. It could potentially be built by a nonprofit, and the city could have a contract to purchase it over a period of years that would include the operations and maintenance. We'd also need to make sure that we had an owner identified for the retail portion. I think either one of the development firms is fully capable of building and running and operating that retail portion. I would leave it up to the two of them to work out which one they think would be better suited towards it. And then the project phasing, I outlined that a little bit earlier, talking about how really for this to work, you'd want to start parking first, then move into the Marion Square property, and only after the Marion Square property was done would you move on to the existing library site. But in the space of a couple of years, you'd see a pretty significant change and a transformation of Marion on this side of the 6th Avenue corridor. It would be very, very different. But I'm at a point where I need some guidance from the council on if we're going to go, there's potential grant opportunities and other things out here that we can go after to help with the costs of this project, but we've got to get moving on some of these things to get the project going. There's just an awful lot of legwork that'll have to be done to make it happen. And I'm not asking for decisions on these things today or on Thursday, but they need to be made this month. And I wanted to make sure you had some lead time to understand what was going on so that if you have questions, concerns, we can get those identified and bring those decision points back to council at the second set of meetings in August. Because that 11th Street is a key. It changes the design for the site. I do think if we close it, it provides some opportunities, but you said the adopted plan that we have right now shows it being open. I'd hoped that we'd be a little further along with the update of the Central Corridor Plan and have a little bit more guidance from them on their recommendations for that. But we may have something preliminary from them before then. I just can't guarantee it. And then parking ownership. I'm continuing to beat the bushes to see what might be out there for nonprofit options. I found a few. I haven't found one that really has done this in Iowa yet. You're seeing them in major metro areas, Dallas, places like that, where they're managing 1,500 or 3,000 space parking units. But we'll continue to research those options as well. So, questions?
Where do you go first, Lon? 11th Street, I don't see us ever opening 11th Street from either side, personally. But if we had the parking ramp and had retail under it, we would have a space for the mall people to move to. If they so desired.
Yeah, and I know these are a little bit hard to see, but that's one of the advantages is that the spaces could really be configured around the needs of the businesses because we'd have a lot of influence on how that came together. As I look at this area, this is the overview of what the footprint of the building would be on the existing library site. You can see that they do still have a parking lot there as well to allow for employees to be able to use that, and if there is some retail in there to be able to use that. But they had originally conceived that skywalk connecting these two buildings that wouldn't be needed if we were to allow for 11th Street to be closed. It does provide some opportunities for green space to come up through there. I don't think we'd want building on top of it because I believe there is a sewer line that goes down through the middle of that, so there'd have to be some limitations on what could happen with it. But it's a pretty significant cost savings if you eliminate that skywalk. The other thing that I guess appeals to me from that is I do try to think of things in terms of view shed, and as people are driving up to this area from the south and coming into the uptown, I don't know that the thing that you wanted to see is a skywalk. This would allow them to look up and see the plaza, see the extension of the park, see the library, and really see all the way through 11th Street, all the way into the 7th Avenue area. So it provides some benefits from that standpoint. And, there are some options that you gain by doing that aren't available now. I mean, if there's restaurants in that retail area, they potentially can have outdoor seating and things like that could be over in that 11th Avenue or 11th Street space that aren't there right now.
Well, when Dan connects 10th and 11th down here at 3rd somewhere, there'll be a lot less traffic on 11th.
So the parking for the library would be the main floor, the lower level of the ramp, the city lot or city section.
Right. Yeah, the main floor would always be public parking.
Mm-hmm. Then you said the skywalk across 6th into the library building, that would be for tenants, or would that be for the apartment tenants, or for going into the library too?
Both. The library is the second floor facing the 6th Avenue side. So when you get the skywalk up to the level that it needs to be, it would come across from the parking ramp into that level. So you'd have to have some kind of a vestibule where, you go left and go into the library, and key card access for your residences or something like that, because that would be a private section of it. But it would be available then for the public to use to go onto the library side.
Is that high enough for traffic underneath, being on the second?
You'd make sure that it would be. I don't know what the height of the ones in downtown Cedar Rapids is, but that's pretty common to see them on the second level with commercial underneath.
So at the existing library site, there's no parking? It would just be, the building would take the whole?
No, they do have, it's an L-shaped building, so they would have a parking lot tucked in behind it.
Oh, okay, in the picture you can see.
It's behind it up there.
Yep. That's the block on the left side in that photo, Kim, or that concept drawing.
Well, I don't know where. There it is.
And how much retail space would be on the parking ramp side?
This rendering has it at about 16,000 square feet. Whether or not that's how big it ends up, you'd have to get into the actual design to make that determination. Might be a little bigger, might be a little smaller.
And how much is in the strip mall right now?
24,000 over there total. This would increase the total amount of retail and commercial space in the uptown, because the amount on the Marion Square Mall site right now, you'd have about 10,000 square feet facing on the 7th Avenue side, and between 10 and 12,000 square feet facing 6th Avenue, plus then the potentially up to 16,000 square feet here on the south side of 6th Ave. But in the actual library, on the existing library site, that space for retail there is flexible. The only place they've really shown any retail on that block is on the corner across from the Heritage Center. They'd maybe put something on that corner, but I don't think they were looking at a big piece, maybe around 4,000 square feet. They're really wanting to get an employer on that main floor.
What would the rest of that be along?
The top floors are all residential.
No, the rest of the lower level there, if they're only going to have retail on there.
You'd have retail in the corner. The rest would be commercial, probably suitable for like office space.
Okay.
Yep. So it's all commercial. But with the changes that the state made to the property tax law, the commercial has a huge benefit. Since it's taxable at 90% of assessed value versus the residential, which ultimately is going to be at 50 to 55% of value, you generate a lot more property tax revenue per square foot for the commercial. And this one has a pretty substantial commercial footprint.
What type of grants were you talking about that are available?
One of the ones that we can potentially access is funding through the Economic Development Administration. It could be available to help with the construction of the parking ramp. The idea would be is that the parking ramp will be needed to support bringing that employer in on the main floor of the library, because they're going to want to know if they're going to bring 150 employees to Uptown Marion every day, that they're going to have a place to park. So it's a necessary step in the development of the overall project. I've been working with the East Central Iowa Council of Governments on that. On August 10th or 11th, they're going to have some folks in from EDA that are going to come to Marion, and we're going to walk through the project with them.
And that ramp would supply enough parking for the library, the retail, the commercial, and the two apartments.
Yeah, you'd have about twice the amount of parking over there that is available now. I forget the exact figure, but I think between the two, with the retail on the main floor, we end up with about 225 spaces.
With 2 floors. Or wait a minute.
Yeah.
2-story parking.
The 2-story ramp. We end up with about 225.
But don't you need, well, I guess it depends on the restrictions for the
Yeah, and
tenants if they get one spot or two spots.
And I don't know how many are in that parking lot that they're showing behind the library. I think it's around 60 spaces, which is about what's on the library site right now. I think the library site right now has 58, and they were looking at replacing that on the footprint of the existing library lot. So you wouldn't have a net loss there, and then you'd replace the other ones with parking in and around these. You'd gain some on the north side of the library or the north side of the Marion Square Mall by transitioning over to the angle parking away from the parallel parking that's there now.
You would think, Lon, it'd be cheaper to build a 3-story parking ramp now than it's going to be to add to it in 3 years.
Yeah, that's really the question is, I'm just going off of the numbers that they've given me for now on a per space basis, but when you actually get into the actual design of the ramp, it may be more cost effective to go ahead and build it now versus waiting 5 years and then coming in and adding a third floor that 5 years from now costs $5.5 or $6 million versus being able to do it for $3.5 or whatever the number comes out to be today. Those are part of what will be determined as we move forward with the project, is to firm those numbers up, come up with a design, come up with a parking number. Everything is still a little conceptual at this point. Even putting the drop off for the book drop and the mail and everything in there, you have to take out a couple of parking places to be able to do that, and their original concept didn't have that. So there's a lot of work there to get down to an exact number on that. Like I said, if we're ready to start moving on this, there's a lot of pieces that have to come together really quickly. We've got to start working with the Library Foundation on their piece of funding for the project. We have to start getting the agreements in place for who's going to build the ramp, who's going to own and operate the commercial space, start working through the financing for the ramp, getting any agreements in place for development on the projects on the 2 locations. It's just, this is going to be a very, very, very significant, large project. There's a lot of work associated with it, which is why I wanted to make sure that, if you've got questions or concerns, let's get them raised now and before we start putting significant staff time into it. It's going to affect a lot of departments because you're talking about needing to replat properties. We still have one property over here that we need to acquire. There's going to be a lot of work with traffic and engineering and building and fire to review these plans as they come in and make sure everything works together. It's going to have to be a big effort. But coming out of the end of it, you're talking about having, $10 million worth of new commercial value in the uptown for an area that's got about 1.6, 1.7 of commercial value right now. 149, 150 new housing units that don't exist in the current market. And potentially bringing a major employer, which we really haven't had since ESCO left and built their new building. Shermco was a great employer, but the nature of their business was they'd come in and converge on the building, and by 7:30 in the morning, 95% of them were out on job sites and left and traveled. So they didn't really have that core of people that we had when we had ESCO up here.
So ultimately, a 3-story parking garage would be roughly $350 then?
The 3-story parking garage with the retail in it, they were estimating it at almost 394.
Okay.
And the rendering that I put in here, that is a 3-story ramp. Now, I don't think it would look like that because I don't know that this one meets our uptown design standards, and you'd probably want to do some more at ground level to differentiate the retail. And this one shows the skywalk going over to the building that would be built on the library site that wouldn't be necessary.
And the funding of this, how did you envision that if the city were to own it?
I think the big thing is that, all of a sudden, if these projects move forward, we do have that $650,000 that's going to be generated annually that we can draw on through tax increment financing. The ideal way that this would move forward is that you'd have a nonprofit who manages and builds parking ramps, build the ramp based on a lease purchase agreement with the city, where at the end of 20 years or something like that, the city would own the ramp, and at that point, we would move over to just an operations and maintenance agreement on the parking. Marion's in kind of a strange spot, because most places where you're ready to develop parking ramps, they've already transitioned to paid on-street parking.
Yeah.
And Marion's never had paid on-street parking. That usually is necessary to support the cost of the parking ramp. When we looked at the other project, the one further north where the Allen Vernon Hoskins building was at, we could either afford to build it or afford to maintain it. We couldn't do both. And so that's been kind of the struggle. Without that on-street parking to pay your O&M costs, you can't really afford to do both. This is a way, though, this one is quite a bit less expensive to build, just because this one you're dealing with a whole block, so it's kind of a standard package parking ramp. The other one was going to have to be a custom-sized, poured-in-place, because they were only dealing with a half a block. This one you're not dealing with that. So it's a lot less expensive. When I talked about the way that they would propose to build it using the tilt-up concrete and just assembling it with the precast panels, that's a lot less expensive than doing custom work on site. So it goes faster, it's less expensive, still a substantial structure. But with these projects coming together in this way, it creates the financial resources that you need to not only afford the library project, but also to be able to afford the parking ramp. But I don't think Marion, I don't think today is the day to have the full conversation, but we can't keep ignoring the fact that providing on-street parking costs money. And we've been providing it for free. We continue to provide it for free. At some point, we're just not going to be able to do that.
What and when are you going to expect something from the council?
I think we need to, at a minimum, have that discussion and decision on 11th Street, probably at the second council meeting this month. Now, I'm at the point right now where, I'm going to start moving into the heavy-duty side of the financial planning for this. I have to engage legal counsel on putting those agreements together. So up to date, right now, it's really been internal staff time driven with some occasional consulting and, us putting time and effort on the staff side into it. But now I've got to actually start engaging people that we have to pay outside of our regular salaries and stuff to start putting these together. So
It's taken 5 or 6 years to get us to this point, though. You can't expect us to.
No, I know. No. And all of those pieces still have to come back to the council for approval. I know it's a lot to digest, but it's taken 5 years to get to this point. And
is the parking ramp, is 3 the max it can go up? Can it be made to go to a 4th if how many years down the road it's needed?
I'm sure it could. Yeah. The big thing is we just want to make sure that it stays in scale with the other buildings around it. The proposal on the library, existing library site is, though, a 4-story building, right. So that wouldn't be too far out.
With I kind of agree with Will a little bit, the kind of parking, when you have a 75 unit, if that ends up going, 75 unit residential, and then that's part of that plus a potential of 150 commercial employees coming in there. You start adding up the spots, and are we gaining a whole lot? I mean, we need I don't disagree, we need a parking ramp downtown Marion, just because the fact that parking is an issue. And you hear that all the time. Parking is, and hopefully the 390-some spots, we're really gaining some, obviously on the weekend and the evening, yeah, that's not going to be, but during the normal day, obviously some of the people in the residential units during the day and the week, they're going to be, not there, but that their parking spots on probably the second story would probably be their parking, right?
Their own, yeah.
Their own
I
parking.
think Aspect actually views that parking as being combination residential and commercial because of exactly what you're talking about, where people are gone during the day, the business can operate during the day, and there'd be some overlap in their ability to use that floor. And then that's why they were having some parking spaces over on that block as well, behind the building, to be able to support the ones that might be more coming and going. So between the two, they felt that a two-story ramp would be enough to address the immediate needs. But I would agree that, if we're thinking 5 years out, 8 years out, other projects are coming along on the 6th Avenue side. If there's a significant cost savings by forging ahead and just doing the 3-story ramp right now, as long as the finances would support it, I'd be fine with doing that. The council just needs to understand the implications of it, and as we work through the financing plan on it, we could bring that back and show you more detail about how that would work.
Yeah, and when you got smarter people than me out there that understand how the parking and the residential and the commercial all interlap, and availability and whatnot, I think that's, when you throw that in the mix, I could see that as being a possibility of, gaining some just because of the fact that during the day, people will be going to work and so that might not, and, there may be enough spaces then. So.
I'm alone a lot of times, but I realize these are concept drawings. They're way too modern for my liking. I would like to see a crosswalk be a covered bridge or a railroad car or something so different that we're not that big town west of us here. I know you have a lot of brick requirements uptown. I own a building across the corner that was built in 1856, and I don't want to see an all-glass building across the corner from me. That's me talking. Somebody else may love it.
Yeah, and that's why I said this one I don't think would meet the design standards for the uptown. It is too modern. It's got too much glass. It doesn't have enough stone on it. But it was a concept drawing that they wanted to be able to show so that we could see, scale-wise, what does it look like? How big is it? What could it potentially look like? And there's really two schools of thought on doing new developments in neighborhoods that have historic buildings. We've probably all seen buildings where they try to make them look historic and they just don't pull it off and it sits out like a sore thumb. Personally, I prefer that they come up with a design that's complementary to the buildings that there, but doesn't try to emulate the historic buildings and try to look too much like a new copy of what's already there. There's a fine line to walk there between being too modern and standing out on one side versus standing out on the other. But in both cases, you're working with companies that either are, in the case of Aspect, they're owned by an architect, or in the case of Ryan, they have access to a lot of very talented architects.
It's hard to copy quality of the 1800s.
It's been a long time since I've seen a 3-row brick building built.
Do we have anything else for now?
You want to know by next council meeting what we think of 11th being shut down, correct?
That's the big piece because it has such an impact on the design coming through here. And, philosophically, if you're opposed to us owning a parking ramp, I need to know that too, because that's a key piece of this. Whether we own it right away or we own it 20 years from now, ultimately, I think the best path forward is for us to own it. That way we can ensure that it always stays public and we have more influence and more control over it. I've said I'm kind of agnostic on whether we own it now or we own it 20 years from now. The big key is to get it built.
I'll say now that 11th's going away. Shouldn't say I like Paul's idea, but I'm with Paul on the 10th eventually connecting into 11th, and so that
10th?
section of 11th would not even be needed anymore, really.
Yeah, I don't see any reason to think about personally opening 11th.
Yeah, I'm
You gain a lot of
okay with
parking,
that,
diagonal parking, if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
You mean parking on the section of
Over here.
this section of 11th?
Yeah.
But I don't know if would it be used for parking? Or is that still up in the air?
Over here,
Yeah, that part.
they haven't given me a concept on it. You'd need to, at a minimum, keep some of it open so that you could have an entrance into the parking ramp and into the parking lot. So there would be some potential to still preserve kind of some of that street level parking in that area. They would just have to give us a better concept with what they would want to do if they knew that the property was available.
You know, I've argued a bit with Dan at times. I hate to see, like when we redo the sidewalks, that I would like to see wood. That's probably not going to happen, but I hate to see new concrete beside an 1800 building. I hate to see new concrete in this mall when they can dye it pretty easily, Dan, right? Whatever color we might like. You know, I hate to see our downtown, uptown become a modern facility because it isn't, and we gain what we have because it isn't. And let's not mess it up at this point. But we can talk about 11th Thursday. Everybody comfortable with that?
Next Thursday?
Thursday?
Not this
Yeah,
Thursday.
that's coming up, you know.
Well, you're talking the next August, whatever you want to know.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't have.
Not this week.
So I knew this was going to be a lot to throw at you,
17th.
and to kind of, it's the first time we've really wrapped everything together with both major redevelopment projects and then the parking in there in the middle, and wanted to give you some time to digest it and think about it before throwing you into starting to make decisions related to it.
Okay.
All right. The next one, item number 3, is a public hearing on a proposed development agreement with Squaw Creek Crossing Incorporated. That's the name of the company that's actually doing the development side of the Water Rock project out at 15113. The city is helping with the cost of several different pieces of that, one of which is the cost of putting stormwater detention underground, which allows them to build more buildings, and then the cost of future off-site improvements to the transportation network. So this is the agreement that carries that out. We have put some language in there to make sure that they have a continued focus on a hotel. We view that as being one of the centerpieces for the city's involvement in that, not only because it creates taxable value per square foot, but also because of the impact on the hotel-motel tax side of things. We did provide an opportunity there that if they were, for example, they're having a hotel feasibility study done right now, so our timelines are all based around the idea that that study comes back positive. If the study comes back and says, you know, a hotel is an okay idea, but you really need to wait until Prospect Meadows is up and running, we wanted to preserve the ability for them to be able to do that, but maybe wait a couple of years before they do it. Conversely, if the study comes back and says that, you know, the hotel's not a good idea, we wanted them to have the opportunity to go back and say, well, let's put this there instead because it'll create the equivalent property tax value without having to go through and fully amend the agreement again. So, just trying to make sure that we wrote an agreement that was sensitive to the realities of the hotel market, because our hotel study, once it determined that the Prince Ag site was the #1 location, really focused on that and the market for a hotel at that location, and didn't really get into what's the market for a hotel out at 15113.
Well, I think about a 151 and 13. I don't know if we thank Mike or whoever made the Marion sign readable out there did a nice job. I don't know if Ryan's boys did that or it really helped. That sign was hidden and it really looks nice.
Since you brought up Prospect Meadows, you haven't heard anything new lately on it?
We're going to be going in on Friday and meeting with the Hall Perrine Foundation to talk about the application, but expecting to put in an application to them within the next 45 days. That's really the last big piece of the financing that's needed for that project. I think if we're successful in that ask, that unlocks about another $1 million of conditional commitments that are kind of watching what Hall Perrine does. Their goal is to have the grading package out to bid in September.
Okay, any other questions? I'll move to 6.
Number 6 is the next stage regarding an agreement between the city and Genesis Equities. This is for the multi-tenant commercial property down on 3rd Avenue. We're assisting with the cost of upgrading the building to include fire suppression systems, and it has the option in there that if they find a tenant that has a need for a loading dock, that we will assist with the cost of putting that dock in as well.
Any questions on that? Moving to 8, let me get, oh, there he is.
He's got a buzzer.
Yeah, I need a buzzer.
Number 8 is just 2 new job descriptions. This is the council receives and files job descriptions, gives you a chance to take a look at them. But the planner 1 position is a new one that was in the budget this year that we're going to be creating. And then the police confidential data analyst is a civilian position. Number 14 was one that I just wanted to bring to your attention. The Heritage Center, if the council is so inclined, would like to use the security system that's in the old ABC Connections building. It was part of the real estate when we acquired it. We don't really have a use for it because our system's going to be a lot broader than that. But in order for us to do a donation, there are a couple of administrative steps you have to go through. We have to do a resolution declaring it as surplus property, and then we'd want to do another resolution designating that we were going to make a donation to them as a nonprofit. I'm not sure. We'd have to check it out to make sure that it still works. I'm assuming it does, but the power's been off in the building for a while, so we've got no way to test it without taking it out and hooking it up somewhere else.
In light of what happened at the pool, is it something that could be used there in the meantime?
Tend to doubt it. I don't know that it's got the pool's on a big site. I don't know that it's got enough length. And the police department has other options for that are much higher resolution.
They would remove it and install it themselves, or?
Yeah, they're just asking if we'd be willing to donate it to them.
Okay.
I know they've been looking at a few programs that require some security around the outside of the building for some exterior displays that can't come in unless they have a system in place to provide some security.
I would like to see maybe a bid on the pool. I think if we could do something that we definitely need a security system at the swimming pool.
If I could, just to that, Paul, we need security systems in a lot of locations, not just at the pool, Lau Park, Thomas Park. Those are just a couple of the high priority areas that we have within the park system. So I think when we look at overall, a larger security camera project, I personally believe that's the way to go. That'll be the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, for the city as a whole. So that's just a comment that I have for that.
You get a better deal when you do a larger project, is that what you're saying?
What did it cost us to drain and refill that pool?
I don't have exact numbers on that. I'm going to estimate that with staff time and cost, chemicals will probably be somewhere in $3,000 to $5,000 range by the time all said and done. A lot of that will be involved with the staff time, with the draining the pool, the cleaning, and then the start of the refill cycle.
So the plan is the Uptown Artway security camera project that council approved at a recent meeting, that system will be integrated in with the rest of the security cameras that we are looking to put in the parks and other city facilities. So we do still have some funding available currently, and depending on how much that full build-out will cost, we would be potentially increasing that request in the next CIP round coming up next year.
And the only other item for today then is to go into the closed session under item I.
Do I need a motion?
So moved.
For a second?
Second.
I have reviewed the proposed subject matter for the closed session and find the same to be appropriate under Iowa Code 21.5J.
Okay, so all those in favor of adjourning?
Roll call.
Oh, roll call, sorry, yeah.
Mr. Draper?
Yes.
Ms. Etzel? Mayor Abalosely?
Yes.
Mr. Brandt?
Yes.
Mr. Nicholson?
Yes.
Ms. Pazur? Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned to closed session.
No.